for the third time. I know I said I want to react to what if the Rebels won the Battle of Hoth. Won the Battle of Hoth last time, and that my last, and when I did the reaction to what if Anakin Skywalker became Senator of Tatooine, and I said I'd do a reaction to what if the Rebels won the Battle of Hoth next or sometime later. But this came up when I was going through YouTube, and yeah, not this, this. This came up, so what if Anakin Skywalker saved Satine with Delta Squad? So, here we're here now, so I'm reacting to what if Anakin Skywalker saved Satine with Delta Squad. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. I'll have PPSW's channel in the description as always. And also don't forget to check out my reaction playlist to see more of my reactions too. And this will be my last reaction for later tonight. Well, not tonight, but this will be my last reaction until later on tonight. In the meantime, I'm reacting to what if Anakin saved Satine with Delta Squad. Let's see.
Hello. Our story begins inside the hangar bay of the Jedi Temple. Anakin was looking for Obi-Wan, without having any knowledge of where he had gone. He walked across the floors and saw Master Satine messing with a starship. Master Tin was using a wrench to tighten a bolt when it popped off and sent liquid pouring out of it. Skywalker reacted quickly by raising his hand and holding the oil from pouring out of the vessel. Sacy smiled and quickly tightened the bolt that he had accidentally released. He thanked Anakin as he set down his wrench and straightened his back. Anakin nodded his head and asked Master Sacy if he could trouble him for a moment, and the Jedi Master nodded. Anakin asked where Obi-Wan had gone. Sacy thought for a moment, trying to think. There weren't any sanctioned missions, were there? He thought to himself as his partner walked back into the chamber with a set of tools. Plo set them down on the side of Anakin and greeted him. Sacy thanked Plo for being present for his little accident, which obviously confused the Keldor Jedi Master. Disregarding his own statement, Sacy asked if Plo remembered Master Kenobi being sent or sanctioned for any missions. Plo looked to Skywalker and then backed up to Sacy. He thought for a moment and asked Master Tin if he was sent to Mandalore or if that was under his own accordance. Sacy wasn't sure. The two council members, despite being some of the most important Jedi generals in the war effort, still found time to help out the Republic workers that frequented the hangar bay of the temple. Plo disclosed that it likely wasn't a sanctioned mission, considering Master Kenobi's personal connection to Mandalore, but that was where he was going. Anakin had a look of confusion on his face, which Master Tin addressed, telling him that they'd been in the hangar bay all day working on the ship. It was a difficult piece of machinery, and they were trying to figure out what would make it tick. They hadn't done that, so a lot of fun. Anakin thanked the two Jedi Masters for helping him, as he started out towards the Jedi Starfighter parked at the edge of the hangar. Once he got in, he opened up a long-range communication and contacted a secret code. When he got into contact, he could see one of 4 Republic commandos he was looking for. Scorch, in a still and neutral voice, asked the Jedi General what he could help him with. Anakin asked if they were on any missions at the moment, and he shook his head. Scorch waved his hand over as Boss, Fixer, and Sev walked over, appearing over the hologram. Boss asked Anakin what his mission was, and he asked them if they could meet him at Mandalore. They nodded their heads and gave him a time frame before ending the call and departing.
Yeah, I think it was season 5 of the Clone Wars where we saw these troopers, or one of these troopers.
Boss asked Anakin what his mission was, and he asked them if they could meet him at Mandalore. They nodded their heads and gave...
Yeah, it was... Let's see... which one? Not you. I know, it was this trooper right here.
The time frame. Before...
Yeah, it was this trooper right here that we saw in the Clone Wars season 5. The droid mission, I think. one of the missions with all the Archie units had like that mission. I think it was season 5 episode. Season 5 episode 7, I think it was. Or season 5 episode 2. It was one of those, but I believe it was season 5 that we got to see this commando trooper right here. So yeah.
Ending the call and departing. Skywalker smiled. He felt bad for the squad, but they owed him this one. He locked the cockpit and ignited the thrusters on the starfighter.
How did
Masters
they owe
Plo
him?
and Tin looked over, realizing that they had just accidentally assigned Anakin to Mandalore to help Master Kenobi with whatever he was doing. Skywalker pulled back the yoke and the ship lifted before he shoved the throttle forward and whipped out of the hangar bays. He eventually connected with a hyperspace ring just outside the gravitational pull of the planet before jumping to hyperspace. Anakin did lend the Twilight to Obi-Wan, but he just never asked about the specifics regarding the mission. Inside the cockpit, he could see blue streaks cover his window, and he closed his eyes and allowed the ripple of hyperspace to outline the darkness in his closed eyes. He thought back to a moment of desperation at some point in the war. Delta Squad had gone several months without one of their key members, and they were on the verge of totally disbanding. As is the way of war, they were forced to move on and accept that Sev had been lost. Their sniper was replaced with a new clone, and in his very first mission, he was gutted by a vibroblade from a commando droid. Delta Squad was hurting, none more than Scorch, who had once been the life force of the squad. He'd been beaten down by the apparent death of his brother. Despite being a man created for war, no amount of programming could undo 10 years worth of brotherhood. In this desperation, especially for Boss, who could feel the squad start to pull apart, he went to General Skywalker and asked him for help. Anakin wasn't able to do anything personally because he was in command of his student, but he personally assigned the squad to a rescue mission. Delta Squad was on the assignment for about a month, and they eventually found their brother off one of the moons of Trandoja. He was a part of some hunting game the lizard people liked to play, and Delta slaughtered the hunters before saving their brother and a couple of unlucky regs that were forced into the forest. Now the squad was whole again. When Anakin's eyes opened, the ship twisted and creaked as it dropped out of hyperspace. He looked down at Mandalore, and he hoped it wasn't too late. He dropped his hyperspace ring and sped down to the surface, eventually catching up to a Republic shuttle, one that was holding the commando squad he assigned to the planet. The two ships glided down to the surface where they landed at the landing docks. When they exited, they could hear blaster fire in the distance, but it was sporadic, not really continuous. Anakin greeted the 4 commandos, who only now, for the first time since they found their lost squad member, were able to see him in person. They kept the conversation short as they moved towards the skiff and popped on. Before getting onto the skiff,
it went through both ear, it went around my earbuds. Is that an audio thing or what?
who only now, for the first time since they found their lost squad member, were able to see him in person. They kept the conversation short as they moved towards the skiff and popped on. Before getting onto the skiff, Fixer lit a small sensor node near the 2 vessels. Anakin asked what he was doing, and the commander told him that he'd be able to detect if any other ships arrived to the location, specifically enemy reinforcements. Fixer grabbed the control levers and pressed them forward, asking General Skywalker where they were going. Anakin moved to the front of the skiff and pointed towards the palace. He didn't know where Obi-Wan was. His hope was that everything was okay, but he suspected that everything was taking place inside of the throne room. Anakin wasn't given many details on anything. He did believe that something had transpired, thanks to what Obi-Wan had said regarding Mandalore before, but Anakin truthfully couldn't really remember what it was. He thought it was a criminal syndicate takeover of the planet, but that information would be revealed when they got to the throne room. Boss asked Anakin how they planned on entering, and Skywalker didn't know. He hadn't really been around the planet before, so they would just go in together. The 5 commandos ran into the palace when they arrived and scanned the area. Anakin ran behind Boss, who took point. Sev and Scorch were behind Anakin, with Fixer running side by side with the Jedi General. Sev was using his night vision to peer around corners, especially with how dark the palace was.
Oh, God.
They moved down a large corridor when they heard a shuffling, like someone was thrown to the ground. Anakin moved quickly as he peeked around the corner. There were 2 guards at the edge of the throne room, but they weren't looking down the corridor where Anakin and the commandos were. The guards would be able to see the group through their peripherals, but they were too excited to watch Satine die at the hands of Maul. She'd been publicly scrutinized, and now she'd be killed. Boss moved his hands and signaled out, as Anakin kept his eyes on Obi-Wan, who was forced to the ground by 2 inept guards. He was confused, but understanding that Obi-Wan must have been planning something. Within moments of Delta moving themselves into position, Anakin watched Maul use the Force and raise Satine off the ground. She started the choke, and yet Obi-Wan did nothing. Maybe that was the proper thing to do, but doing something would be better than this. Better than watching someone Anakin knew Obi-Wan loved die like this. Rage built up within Skywalker as he pulled his lightsaber from his belt. His eyes drifted back over to the commandos who were waiting for his command. He nodded his head, and they began. Sev fired one shot, a blaster bolt that hit both commandos, sliding between their armor and their helmets, slicing them through their necks and dropping both of them. Fixer, Boss, and Scorch moved out into the chambers and started to open fire at the other Mandalorians, who couldn't respond fast enough. Maul was confused, and Skywalker took a note out of his master's book, using force speed for the first time and never using it again. He sped across the throne room chambers and ignited his lightsaber in front of Maul, swinging up and slicing the gloating Zabrak's hand clean off. He yelped in pain as Anakin used the force to shove Savage back. The massive Dathomirian didn't fall, but he slid back far enough to twist his ankle off the side of the throne and topple over. Anakin swung for Maul's head, but he ducked and watched a number of his horns fall off of it. Rage filled his body as he attacked Anakin. Delta Squad was able to run a distraction, getting the Mandalorian foot soldiers to chase after them. Sev shot a blast that clipped the restraints on Obi-Wan's hands, and the Jedi Master got to his feet, where Anakin was throwing him his lightsaber. He caught the Jedi weapon and spun forward, blocking a strike from Savage. Scorch was the first one to Satine's side, as he grabbed her hand and pulled her forward, using his back as a shield from any potential blaster fire. Behind Scorch, the other commandos surrounded the Mandalorians. Despite having inferior numbers, they were able to get around them and force them to spread themselves out as thin as possible. This gave the commandos the perfect chance to slaughter them. Anakin deflected strikes from Maul, who angrily pressed his attack. Skywalker's blade slapped the ground before clipping the side of Maul's shoulder and blocking his strike. Maul batted each side of his lightsaber forward, which Anakin was able to perfectly deflect. Skywalker patiently held his own. Now that the Duchess was safe, his biggest concern was now out of the way. Obi-Wan kicked Savage's knee once more before spinning and kicking Savage in the face, throwing him into the window. Obi-Wan turned back and ran to Anakin's side as they watched the Republic commandos run towards the corridor they came from. Without saying a word, they decided to follow. As they got to the corridor with Delta, more Mandalorians poured into the throne. With the Jedi in front, the commandos could focus on firing at the weak points in the Mandalorian armor. Thanks to Fixer, he was able to do some information searching before they got here, so if their targets were indeed Mandalorians, they'd be able to defeat them in combat. Anakin had so many words for Obi-Wan, but they would have to wait. They blocked their shots and defended the clones and the Duchess. Satine watched from behind as more of Maul's insurgents got in front of them. Savage and Maul edge-walked behind their men, waiting for their opportunity to strike. With so much combat taking place inside the palace, Bo-Katan and her Night Owls started to make a pursuit of Satine. If they could save her, they could save Mandalore. Bo had only just begun to realize the importance of her sister's political stance in the galaxy and on Mandalore. She had been gaslit by Pre Vizsla, and now she could start seeing the light. Her forces moved down towards the palace as a large-scale battle started to erupt on the landing platforms. Inside the corridors, Fixer led the clones on their retreat. Satine was kept between himself and Scorch, with the other two commandos doing as much cover fire as possible. Kenobi and Skywalker kept the Mandalorians away from them until they were ordered to charge in. At that moment, Boss yelled out, telling Scorch and Fixer the incentive to get the Duchess to their shuttle and get her off the planet. As they retreated with Satine in their arms, Bo-Katan arrived with her Night Owls. Obi-Wan and Anakin were blocking, parrying, and striking the Mandalorians who were attacking them. Sev was getting a little handsy with his vibro blades, and Boss was doing the same. With the hand-to-hand combat taking place, Maul and Savage ignited their weapons and attacked forward. Anakin was the first one hit by this, as he defended himself, stumbling back from Maul, whose blade struck at him. Skywalker power-stepped into Maul and shoved him backwards, throwing him into a Mandalorian who fell over. Maul didn't hit the ground, but his blade re-engaged with Anakin. Obi-Wan was able to cut through two guards before engaging with Savage, as he defended himself from the monstrous Zabrak. Boss and Sev shot down some more Mandalorians, forcing their numbers to dwindle. Before they knew it, the Night Owls were in their corner assisting them. Fixer and Scorch kept their distance as the echo of lightsabers crawled closer and closer. Scorch asked his squad mate what they should do, but he was semi-distracted. He didn't even react to his friend's question. Fixer told Scorch that an Edda-class shuttle had just landed at the landing zone, which didn't make any sense. The Jedi used Edda-class shuttles, but this wasn't one on any of their scanners. Of course anyone could have bought one, but still, this seemed really weird. Who was here, and why were they arriving to what seemed to be a battle zone? Maul, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Savage all engaged with each other. Their blades were quick and fierce. The commandos had finished
Time
their
to go,
job,
boys,
and
come
Bo-Katan
on.
couldn't really employ herself in this combat, so she took her night owls and avoided the lightsaber duel. She and the rest of Delta linked up with Satine, Scorch, and Fixer. She was very excited to see her sister, despite the previous bad blood that existed between Bo and what she believed was her sister. Satine never held such distaste for Bo, so it was really a one-sided thing. They didn't really hug or anything, but they just planned on what they would do next. Not far from the awkward family reunion, there was the duel. Kenobi and Skywalker had done this with Savage before, but this time they would finish what they started. Their lightsabers drove into their opponent's blades. They didn't land killing blows, but they tried for victory. Anakin's overly aggressive style added to their attacks. Obi-Wan and Maul were forced to engage again, but Anakin was seized by Savage, who used his brute strength to throw him backwards. He landed on his feet before dashing to the side, and attempting to strike Savage from behind. The hulking Zabrak whipped his elbow back and clipped Anakin in the side of his eye, opening up a small wound near his scar. He rolled off the ground and raised his lightsaber horizontally to his body, before thrusting forward and striking Savage's blade, as he was trying to strike him down. Anakin cut through the blade and kicked Savage into a wall, and before he could land another hit, the Darksaber whipped across the hall and blocked Anakin's strike, but his swing knocked the blade out of the air, forcing Maul to continue using his singular Crimson Lightsaber, which he had to reignite after deigniting it to thread the blade. He and Kenobi continued their continued fight, one with vengeance and hatred, but only for one party. Obi-Wan, unlike their first encounter during the Clone Wars, was able to harmonize and defend himself. He blocked, utilizing every aspect of
And let's see, Palpatine joined the party. Or should I say, Darth Sidious to join the party. I'm surprised that no one has. I'm gonna guess that once he arrives, he just landed. So Palpatine has a while to get to the palace. But then, they'll all sense who it is. Especially Maul. Master.
Form 3 before seeing something. In all their years, and all the time they had spent, Maul hadn't learned much of anything else. He may have been Sidious's student, but he was still who he was 12 years before. That was because his rage and anger on something having already passed never subsided. He was constantly rolling a boulder up a hill and never reaching the top. Kenobi, in a moment of silence in their duel, as Maul began taunting Kenobi, reminding him of his fallen master, Obi-Wan switched forms. He presented Qui-Gon's stance, and Maul could see it. His blades readied as he prepared. By the time Obi-Wan opened his eyes, he stood where Qui-Gon stood all those years ago on Naboo. Maul swung forward, and within 3 quick and aggressive strikes and blocks, Maul found himself pierced by the Jedi Master. Savage was so focused on defending himself from Anakin's assault that he could only subtly feel the death of his master, and when he looked over, distracted by the sight, he felt heat pass through his stomach. Brothers separated by the Sith would be united by the Jedi, in some sick way that sounded much better than it really was.
Oh god,
Kenobi looked over to Anakin, and
What?
he felt heat pass through his stomach. Brothers separated by the Sith would be united by the Jedi, in some sick way that sounded much better than it really was.
Yeah. Some sick, twisted truth. That is, yeah. But now you guys have to worry about getting off the planet before Sidious arrives. He already landed on the planet. They have to get going before he comes.
Kenobi looked over to Anakin, and at the same exact time, they asked each other a question, both being inaudible over the sound of their own voice. Obi-Wan suggested Anakin go first, and he regretted it. Anakin asked Obi-Wan why he didn't do anything. Obi-Wan stuttered, trying to say that as a Jedi, he was resisting the pull to the darkness. Anakin shoved Obi-Wan's shoulder. It wasn't hard, but it also wasn't gentle. He told him that if the person he loved most in the galaxy was in peril, then he had to do something. This wasn't one of those Jedi circumstances where attachment comes into play. It was life or death of a situation for an individual, and for an entire planet. What would he have done if he didn't show up? Kenobi's own question sat idly on the tip of his tongue. If he asked it, it would really seem like he didn't care. Anakin could feel the sisters and commandos coming this way, and so he leaned forward and said he understood how Obi-Wan's commitment to the Jedi was blinding, but if it's a person he truly loved, then nothing in the
There we go.
Code was worth sacrificing for their life. Anakin turned and his face was worn with disappointment. As if in some weird way, Anakin was scolding his own student and the roles had reversed. Skywalker then mumbled quietly enough that no one other than Obi-Wan could hear this, telling him that he knew that Obi-Wan loved Satine more than a friend. He could sense that much. Skywalker turned around and told the Duchess that he wanted to apologize personally for making a mess of her throne room, but he believed it was imperative to get her out of here. She thanked him for his courageousness. While she needed to focus on the moment and creating a strategic escape, she couldn't help but notice the despondent look in Obi-Wan's eyes, ones that held shock, disappointment, heartbreak, and even a bit of frustration or anger. The last emotion was a little hard to pick up on for Satine, being that she hadn't ever seen him angry. Before they could move out, Scorch and Fixer ran over and showed General Skywalker a datapad, telling him that there was someone else here. They asked if it was another Jedi sent to help them, and Skywalker shook his head, Obi-Wan doing the same from behind. This Edda-class shuttle didn't have any Republic signatures on it. It was a neutral vessel. Obi-Wan muttered the word Sidious. Anakin turned back and asked if he thought it was true. He nodded shallowly, before telling the commandos to get the Duchess out of here. Bo raised her hand. She and her Night Owls would handle that. If this individual coming to the throne room was something like the two Zabraks, then that was the Jedi and the clones' trouble, not hers. She and her sister needed to stop the civil war that was to come. Bo grabbed the darksaber and handed it to Satine. She looked at it with disgust, never wanting to hold that weapon, understanding what carnage had brought her people, but she took it for the sake of time. They left quickly and without saying goodbye. Obi-Wan snapped back into things as Skywalker took the helm of the mission. You could see that Obi-Wan was a little bit out of it, but they needed him to be in the moment. If he wasn't, and this was who they suspected it to be, then they were in danger. Delta didn't know what a Sidious was, but they quickly started pulling through their backpacks and setting up traps across the throne room. As they did this, Obi-Wan and Anakin talked a game plan. If this was indeed who they thought it was, then they had a very big problem. The Sith Lord would likely be a cross between the ferocity of Maul and the finesse of Dooku, which meant they needed to utilize Delta as much as possible. Kenobi nodded his head. He removed the Mandalorian armor he was wearing and prepared for what would be an insanely intensive battle. They waited for what felt like hours. Satine was ferried out of the palace and into a private shuttle that departed and took her to Kalevala. Bo tried to send her back to Coruscant, but Satine would not risk that. The Republic had been trying to get into Mandalore for decades, and it would be a dishonor to her people and their father if she caved. The Republic would take away their independence and force them into the Clone War, and of course, after the war, the corruption that plagued administrations of Palpatine and Valorum, plus those who came before them during their father's rule as leader. She couldn't and would not allow that to happen. She would stay on Kalevala and prepare a counter, a means to unite the people. She had the darksaber. Now it was about what she would do with it. Inside the palace, Sidious walked through the doors to find two dead Zabraks in the main chambers. Disappointment covered his face. The Dark Lord never had the opportunity to properly use the dark side and enjoy being a Sith. This was like a mini vacation for him. He would toy around with Maul, kill his brother, and then torture him again. But nope. And oh, what's this? Lightsaber wounds? It seems that there was clearly more than just him. He looked up excitedly. Sith history was about hiding the deaths of the Jedi, and here he can continue a long tradition. Especially with war erupting on the planet, it would be easy for him to hide their bodies. As he looked up, Skywalker and Kenobi ignited their weapons. Panic filled Sidious's body. He couldn't kill Anakin. Why was it that for the first time in a long time that he could get some me time and he had to come across his future student? Sidious contemplated this. He would perform a fighting retreat, one that would allow him to escape but still seduce Anakin. It would just be a bit more challenging now. The Jedi looked to each other and moved in quickly, forcing Sidious to retreat. Before his lightsabers ignited, every single rocket from the dead Mandalorians in the room triggered, and fired explosive rockets at Sidious. He heard the noise before he was blasted by the shock. He was able to defend himself for the most part as the explosions ripped through his robes and damaged his skin. He was flung from his feet as a result of the rockets that indented the floor. Palpatine rolled around and moved to his feet, before a rocket blast clipped him in the elbow, shattering the bone and tossing him to the side. Sidious looked over and saw a couple clones aiming their weapons. Among the rockets, he didn't see it, but the clones had fired their blasters in unison. Sidious shot lightning their way, and he watched the worthless little lab creations flee into darkness. With a limp arm, Sidious turned around and ignited two lightsabers, fighting through the sheer pain and utilizing it to make him stronger. He defended himself from the two Jedi Masters that engaged him. His finesse was just as the Jedi predicted, and he was monstrous with his strikes. Sidious didn't give up a moment, thrusting his lightsabers towards Kenobi, the most, but forcing Anakin to test himself here. Sidious knew he could end this fight. He just needed to find the strike. Obi-Wan could die, Skywalker would become angry, and another method could be implemented for his turn. Sidious calculated everything he needed to do as he fought off the two Jedi Knights. With the clones seemingly gone, their lightsaber duel moved out of the throne room and towards the entrance Sidious used to arrive through. Their blades slashed at each other, as Sidious used nothing but the Force to keep his shattered elbow from falling limp again. The pain made him stronger, and he tried to use it to fuel him to victory. It was difficult though. Palpatine's natural state wasn't the perfect counter to Form 3. Dooku's form picked apart Kenobi's, and while Sidious was able to switch forms, he wasn't exactly trying to overcomplicate the situation for himself, especially with a broken arm. He needed to keep Anakin alive and kill Obi-Wan and escape. If he didn't, then he could ruin everything. There was the alternative where he could escape keeping both Jedi alive. Sidious slipped strikes effortlessly, and then he saw a shift happen. Kenobi flipped into Form 4 to keep up with Skywalker, though a thought crossed Sidious's mind as he blocked strikes at each step. But his mind was like a tornado of thought. Perhaps Kenobi was showing this to mess up Sidious's rhythm. Palpatine struck the ground, forcing Obi-Wan into the air and rolling. Sidious had his opportunity. He brought his lightsaber around and swung for Kenobi's back. Anakin used the Force to pull the blade towards him as he swung at the other blade. Sidious spun around, slicing Anakin across the cheek as he turned and grabbed his face with his unoccupied hand. Obi-Wan swung up and clipped Sidious's thumb, forcing one of the blades from his hand. The Sith Lord shot electricity forward and covered the floor, instead of any one opponent, and it shocked both Anakin and Obi-Wan. Sidious moved quickly to the skiff and hopped on, pulling his dominant lightsaber with the Force. Obi-Wan and Anakin got off their knees after being electrocuted and ran towards another skiff, before chasing after the Sith Lord. Neither Jedi had communication with Bo, who was still fighting on the planet, so they were forced to track Palpatine down alone. A skiff chase transpired, where the Jedi and Sith moved through the city, Palpatine trying to lose them. Obi-Wan prepped a tracker and told Anakin to throw it at the ship when the Sith got into it. He would defend him while he did it. Skywalker piloted the skiff and followed Palpatine out to the landing docks. When they landed, Palpatine had already made his way to the vessel, and the engines whirred. The ramp started to close up, and Anakin launched the tracker onto the ship, before reaching his hands out and gripping the vessel. Obi-Wan was right by his side as he tried to restrain the ship from leaving the planet. Palpatine pulled back and shoved the throttle all the way in, as an explosion ripped through the Edda-class shuttle. The engines whined as it spun around and slammed into the surface. Sev, Fixer, and Boss looked to Scorch, who for the first time since losing Sev, showed an inkling of his old self. Excitement radiated through him, as he held the device that charged the explosives and set them to detonate upon full activation of the engines. The two Jedi shuffled out of the way as the shuttle slammed down into the surface and exploded. Fixer stepped forward, as did the rest of Delta, equipping their blasters with some heavy ordnance. They unloaded on the crashed vessel, sending explosions out of an already burning fire. They had to have killed the Sith, but Obi-Wan felt something shift and used the Force to drop everyone, igniting his lightsaber and being thrown backwards. When he looked up, he was interlocked in a duel with Palpatine, a man with a shredded face and a man with his entire jawline missing, something resembling the age-old Sith Malak. Kenobi ducked a nearly fatal blow, before being lifted off his feet by the Sith Lord.
No.
As Sidious was about to strike Obi-Wan down, his feet left the ground as Sev lunged forward, swinging his fist into Palpatine's back. While he was shoving him forward, Palpatine's lightsabers fell from his hands, as the clone commando, who was much physically stronger than him, beat him before being snapped both by physical strength and use of the Force. The two of them looked at each other. Sidious couldn't see Sev's eyes, but he could see the thermal detonator that was brought up in his right hand, the same hand that Palpatine had his destroyed arm hanging onto. Sev released the ignition switch on the detonator and was launched from his feet. Sidious was pulverized by the explosion that blindsided him. Sev rolled across the ground, his red-covered armor now hidden behind ash and soot. Fixer ran over, never expecting Sev to do something so outlandish. He checked for a pulse and he found that his brother was alright. Palpatine, or what was left of him, on the other hand, was dead. With war kicking off again on the planet of Mandalore, the Jedi and Commandos needed to go. Scorch ran to the shuttle that they arrived on and brought it over.
Yeah, it's like, Darth Sidious, that's Palpatine, versus the Commando droids. And, well, we know who wins in that battle. With the help of the Jedi, of course.
Bringing out a cot for Sev as Boss grabbed deceased chamber and placed Palpatine into it, ensuring that natural decomposition wouldn't take place until they returned to Coruscant. Palpatine's death would be discovered by the Jedi, and they would, as a result, bring the information directly to the Senate. The Council put it to a vote and they decided on doing this. However, not everyone from the council would be present. Due to the insane success from the Mandalore squad, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Mace, and Delta were sent to apprehend Dooku on Sereno, which they would accomplish. Despite there being an importance revolving around the death of Grievous and the capture of Dooku, these events transpiring on Mandalore would be essential for the rebirth of peace in the galaxy. Satine led a neutral system coalition. Palpatine understood that if Mandalore fell, there would be no true diplomatic challenger to his rule. The neutral systems worked because they were without a military, therefore not a legitimate threat. The only quote-unquote danger they posed was simply having different political opinions. Satine was key to that, and if she was killed, then Palpatine's job would become much easier. An empire with a rival neutral systems coalition would be dominated in the galactic political battleground. Because Satine could offer something Palpatine couldn't: peace. She was savvy enough to navigate political discourse with the entire Republic, because she'd been doing it since she was a teenager, shortly after becoming Duchess to a Civil War-ravaged system. But first things were first for the Duchess of Mandalore. She returned to her home, not more than 12 hours after she left. Satine didn't even sleep. She was running off of nothing but drive for her people's safety. She returned with the legendary Darksaber and went to the mount where she had given thousands of speeches over the years. No one showed up, not because they didn't believe her, but because there was pure terror in the streets. So she spoke. War was taking over the galaxy, and it was through this war that a group of criminal pirates were able to convince an individual hellbent on generational bloodlust to betray his own kind. She took the Darksaber and raised it. The broadcast went planet-wide, and everyone could see it. Satine expressed that this weapon had caused irreparable damage to their people, and that time was no more. She was willing to offer an olive branch to her kin, who shared a different view of the Mandalorian way. So much had been lost in their civil war, and they were not going to repeat it. She clarified that there had been a betrayal from her own cabinet, namely Elmec, and Pre Vizsla was used by these criminal syndicates to gain control over their planet. She didn't make excuses, even though there were plenty to give. Even with a standing army, they likely would have been overrun by Sith warriors and the combination of every major criminal syndicate in the Outer Rim teaming up to conquer the planet. Satine ended her speech with an acknowledgement of Mandalorian pride, suggesting that their ability to break past this attempted coup, their conscious decision to avoid this war, and their stoicism in the face of adversity would inspire a galaxy divided by conflict. Not everyone was sold immediately, but with testimonials from Night Owls and even some Vizsla loyalists, turned true Mandalorians, they were able to inform the public of the truth, the reality that Satine was targeted and she was set up to look bad. In the meantime, with the very little destruction to clean up at home, Satine got into contact with the Separatists. The CIS would never end the war at the table with the Republic, so she needed to breach the ice between factions. The Republic had their own struggles, mostly due to the whole Palpatine incident, and the CIS, still hellbent on a war-related victory, was searching for a leader within their ranks to get them across the finish line. This was of course up until they were contacted by Satine. She went to Raxus and addressed the Confederacy inside their parliament. After a lifetime of public service, especially to a war-torn system, she was able to craft up rousing speeches almost back-to-back within the span of a week, first to her people, and second to the Confederacy. She made sure that the footage was leaked to the Jedi Council, hoping that Obi-Wan would reveal the information to the Senate, but they never caught wind. They were busy trying Dooku for his crimes and moving towards a more war-oriented Chancellor, someone with Palpatine's mind but a more aggressive resolve. However, thanks to Satine speaking to the Confederacy, there was a slowdown in the pursuit of war. There was never a ceasefire, but entire campaigns were withheld. The Separatist Council wanted to continue the war, but they couldn't, simply because they had a lot of investments in the CIS itself, so if they betrayed it, they could lose all power, influence, and credits. The Republic was contacted by Satine, and they sent representatives to Mandalore as Dooku received the death penalty for cultivating a war against the Republic. They didn't have concrete proof, but insiders believed that Palpatine and Dooku were working together. The Senate, despite being grateful for the information bestowed to them by the Jedi, completely disregarded the Order as a whole. They lost their political influence, and they also lost their militaristic jurisdiction over the Grand Army of the Republic. On paper, it looked bad, but in reality, it was likely the best thing for them. They could now act neutrally. The public didn't know anything about the Palpatine case, so the Senate worked around it, trying to find a way to turn Palpatine's disappearance into a call to action. But since there was so much deliberation over Dooku's execution, by the time they got around to starting a rally for the war effort, they were given information about the Confederacy's desire for peace. The Jedi, without a tie to the Republic, quickly took advantage of their separation from it and moved into diplomacy operations. It was a total split. Due to everything the criminal syndicates were capable of, thanks to reports filed by Anakin and Obi-Wan from Mandalore, the rest of the Order conducted diplomacy on capital worlds, and also key systems for both the Republic and Confederacy. In the months following the death of Sidious, Satine orchestrated a neutral conference on the planet of Hosnian Prime. She would hold peace talks between a majority of members from all 4 coalitions of this war. The Republic, Confederacy, Jedi, and Neutral Systems Coalition would be present for this meeting. It would transpire for weeks, as the factions came together to end the Clone War once and for all. Everything Palpatine feared happening became reality. When all the squabbling came to a conclusion, the galaxy was left in a stalemate. The war was over, but the smoke had yet to settle. It was hard to remember a period before the war. The Jedi didn't face this. They instead continued what they had started before the Clone War ended. They continued their siege of the criminal syndicates. This wasn't an all-out war on the Outer Rim. The Order wasn't large enough for that. Instead, these were individual missions of Jedi to take down criminal outposts, fleets, stations, slave rings, and more. Mandalore, with the aid of Delta, would contribute to this. Satine decided that the best way to condone the old Mandalorian ways was to unite the Mandalorians and the Jedi. These Mando warriors would be integral to taking down criminal organizations in the Outer Rim. Obi-Wan would eventually find his way to Mandalore and apologize to Satine for everything that happened before. Thanks to his student, it seemed like no master was too old to learn a lesson from their own student. Anakin's words moved Obi-Wan to be more conscious of his emotions. He wouldn't leave the Order, but something similar to what Anakin and Padme were doing would transpire. The state of the galaxy slowly revolved around the structure seen from the neutral systems, which meant the galaxy, in a way, relied on Mandalore's strength. Satine proposed new territory for the complete and total unity of the galaxy, and so Hosnian Prime became home of the Intergalactic Republic. It would be at this point that she would drop out of the galactic political realm and deploy her sister, who had been shadowing her since the beginning of the peace treaties. Those who served the warmongering side of the Clone War would face punishment. The Trade Federation, Commerce Guild, Kaminoans, and others would be stripped of their economical power and lose all reputability among galactic commerce and trust. The Jedi were excused because it was by this point known that Tyrannus was Dooku, thanks to the Kaminoans trying to buy themselves out of galactic punishment. The new system in the galaxy would be one that would thrive for generations to come. The Sith would be destroyed, and the Jedi themselves would find refuge amongst the citizens of the galaxy once again. Mandalore's place in everything would remain constant for the years to come, as the Intergalactic Republic strived for peace not seen since the Golden Age of the Republic. And that, my friends, is our story. And special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Darth Fishiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir Realm 1767, Darth Revan, Grandin Bane, Laliet, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rudy, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu670, Annika Dank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny McGowan, Saints of Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Galaxy66, Nominated Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Force Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex Wolf, The Main 3 First Names, Darksnake46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Support more ways, go check out PPC. Cinema channel's got cool stuff on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. I kind of like the idea of Delta Squad breaking up or losing Sev being the reason Scorch becomes who he is in Bad Batch. And so I kind of wanted to play at that in this story. I also wanted to do this really cool callback to that scene in the Old Republic cinematic where the Republic trooper fights Darth Malgus. Like, that's kind of cool. I could see Sev doing something like that. He's a maniac. Palpatine's a maniac. Goes really well together. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.
Yep. And again, I already reacted to this, and I said that I'm going to react to this later on tonight. So yeah. Around like 10 o'clock or 10:30 later on tonight, something like that, I will react to this. Later tonight. Anyway. Bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. I'll have PPSW's channel in the description as always. And don't forget to check out my reaction playlist to see more of my reactions too. Cause again, I'm gonna be pumping out more Because I'll be like pumping out reactions most likely. With a little bit of something different, like Among Us or Roblox or something. Something random to pop up in the mix. But I'm most likely going to be doing reaction videos for the time being. But anyway, bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.